Ashani miss?
Right. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day 2 of this pre-conference workshop organized in conjunction with the first International Conference on Social Science and Languages, ICSSL 2023, organized by the Faculty of Social Science and Languages of Sabaragama University of Sri Lanka. So, as you are already aware, the first ICSSL is scheduled to be held on the 11th and 12th of January 2023, and this two-day workshop is organized in line with ICSSL 2023. So, without much ado, let me invite our conference co-chairperson, Dr. HUS Pradeep, to brief you on the conference and the objective of conducting this research workshop. I'm sorry. So, Dr. Pradeep.
Thank you, Ms. Asani. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Sampath Penandu, Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences and Languages, Sabaragama University of Sri Lanka. Resource person, Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara. All head of the department, all academic staff members, students, and dear participants. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to warmly welcome you all to the second pre-conference workshop on Developing the Conceptual Framework of Research under the International Conference on Social Sciences and Languages, organized by the Faculty of Social Sciences and Languages, Sabaragama University of Sri Lanka. Dear sir and madam, it is an honor to have the opportunity to say a few words before starting the second pre-conference workshop of the International Conference on Social Sciences and Languages. As we know, the success of research largely depends on its conceptual framework. But developing a sound conceptual framework can be a challenging task. Thus, this workshop is organized to discuss the importance and meaning of developing the sound conceptual framework, which supports the production of reliable research output. It is expected that this workshop will provide the participant with the foundational knowledge on the conceptualization of their future research. As you know, today's workshop will be conducted by the Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara, who is an expert in research methodology and data analysis. Therefore, this workshop will provide us not only essential knowledge, but also great opportunity for us to sort out our problem related with the research methodology. Dear sir and madam, before concluding with the brief introduction to the pre-workshop, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Professor R.M.U.S.K. Ratnayaka, the Vice Chancellor, Sabaragama University of Sri Lanka, for his immeasurable support and encouragement for this event. I would like to thank Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara for accepting our invitation as a resource person. Thank you very much for your time, madam. I also wish to express my deepest gratitude to Dr. Sampath Penandu, Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences and Languages, for his kind support, suggestion, and guideline given to us as a great leader. I also like to thank all the academic staff members, participants, and students who have attended this workshop on short notice. Finally, I would like to thank members of the organizing committee and those who have worked extremely hard to organize this event. Thank you very much for your teamwork. I am sure that you all will feel enriched with knowledge after completing this workshop. I wish you all an enjoyable and inspiring workshop. Thank you very much for your participations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Pradeep. So let me now invite the Dean of the Faculty of Social Science and Languages, Dr. Sampath Fernando, who always stands with us in endeavors such as this. So, sir, if you could share your thoughts on the event.
Okay, thank you, Maxwell. Good morning, everyone. The heads of the Department of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Languages and all the staff members and my dear students and this workshop participants, especially the resource person, Dr. Nanayakkara. I think, so this is the second workshop of our, this is the second workshop related to our conference. I think some of those staff members and students both are attending this workshop. I think when we are talking about research, so basically research can be divided into two parts. The first one is science research, the other one is social science research. I think as far as social science research are concerned, the conceptual framework play a big role. So I did the pure science research for my PhD. Therefore, I didn't have a conceptual framework for my research, but most of us are related with social science research. So therefore, it is mandatory to have a conceptual framework in our research. So therefore, I would like to welcome our resource person, Dr. Nanayakkara. I know that she has enough experience. She has more than enough experience related to the workshop topic. I think she can give her level best to us. I think as far as all the audience are concerned, today you can learn the science behind developing a conceptual framework with the resource person. So once again, I would like to congratulate the resource person, as well as I wish to have a successful workshop today. Thank you. Unfortunately, I am unable to be with the workshop continuously because I have to attend another meeting now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, in commencement of the workshop, to introduce the resource person and to welcome her to conduct the workshop, let me invite Professor Manohari Udupurua, Chairperson, Workshop Organizing Committee. Ma'am?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences and Languages, Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara, resource person, today's workshop, and all the participants. Today we are going to have the second pre-conference workshop. The selected title for the workshop is Developing Conceptual Framework of a Research. For today's workshop, we invited Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara as the resource person, and I am happy to have this chance to introduce to you Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara. Actually, Dr. Madurika accepted our invitation without any hesitation. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara for accepting our invitation. Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara is one of the foremost scholars in the field of business management. She is a senior lecturer, grade 1 in the Department of Commerce and Financial Management, Faculty of University of California. She has completed her first degree as a first-class degree in Bachelor of Business Management in Accountancy at the University of California in 2007. She has obtained her first postgraduate qualification by completing Master of Business Administration in Finance from the University of Colombo in 2012 and PhD in Finance from the Federation University, Australia. Currently, Dr. Madurika is working as a member of several professional organizations. She is a fellow member of Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka, associate member of Institute of Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka, and associate member of Institute of Chartered Professional Managers of Sri Lanka. Dr. Madurika is a prominent researcher and has made a significant contribution to the field of green finance and sustainability, financial distress and financial reporting by undertaking extensive research, disseminating knowledge through many publications, delivering lectures on different themes of the discipline while undertaking various consultancies. She has published a number of research papers in relation to her specialized areas. At the same time, Dr. Madurika has won several awards for her excellent academic capabilities. A Cooperative Society Gold Medal for the student who obtained highest marks for Contemporary Management Course in Master of Business Administration program, University of Colombo, 2010 and 2012. Cohort, award for the best presentation in session 3 of International Conference on Multidisciplinary Innovation for Sustainability and Growth held in Malaysia in 2014. Award for the best presentation of HDR Conference of Federation University, Australia. in July 2017 and best poster of the HDR conference, Federation University Australia, July 2018, can be mentioned as her notable achievements. In addition to these capabilities, Dr. Madurika is a well-known expert in the field of research methodology, statistical analysis, qualitative and quantitative approaches, discriminant analysis, research statistics, analytical techniques, data analysis, and has contributed a resource person of many workshops and training programs organized by the universities, business firms, as well as academic institutions. So I think for this workshop, also we got an ideal resource person to talk about our selected theme. I think we will have an innovative session for this task with Dr. Madurika, and we will be able to widen our knowledge with this experience. So I cordially invite Dr. Madurika to commence the workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for the very long and nice introduction. And also, before starting the session, I would like to thank the organization committee and especially Professor Manohari for inviting me to this workshop organized by the Sabaragamu University of Sri Lanka. Right, so let me share my presentation, and also the participants, if you have any questions, then don't hesitate. You can disturb me and you can ask any questions. No problem. Right. I think you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Right. So today we are supposed to discuss about developing the conceptual framework of a research. Right. So we all know that the conceptual framework is one of the key components of a research study because it gives us the basic framework for our entire study, right? So therefore, knowing how to develop a conceptual framework for our study is very important for any stage of research. That means if you are doing your undergraduate research or a postgraduate research, a master's or a PhD level, right? Even the knowledge on conceptual framework is very important, right? So in this discussion, I'm mainly planning to discuss with you all about how theory related to research and how we can use the theories in building our conceptual frameworks. And related to conceptual framework, we have discussed about different variables that we have to use in our studies. And also the theoretical framework that includes all the relevant components. And we have to identify how we can derive the hypothesis in quantitative research in with the conceptual framework, right? So these are the major areas that I'm going to cover. And if you have any questions, if you want to know any further information related to this, then there's no issue. You can ask at any time. Right. I think you can see these two pictures. We know that before Sir Isaac Newton introduced the theory of gravity, people didn't know why an apple is fallen from a tree. What is the reason? Right? And also there were no any method to explain how a plane is flying. Right? So these were unknown. Now, when you take an apple, why apple is fallen from the tree, right? So we can see that situation, but we don't know why, right? So, but after the theory of gravity, now we know the answer, right? Now we know the answer to why question, right? So therefore, now we can understand here. Sometimes we can see different things in the society. When we live in this society, we can see different things, but sometimes we don't know why, right? So that's why we have to do research, right? So to get the answer to why and how, we have to do this research. And also now suppose that when you are working at a workplace, sometimes you may see your employees are not much happy, right? Your employees are not much happy. And when you go to your home, sometimes you may see that your family members are also not happy. Then why? Right? We need some answer to why. Right? So we can understand they are not happy, but we don't know why they are not happy. Right? So to answer this question also, we have theories, right? So I'm just giving some examples to understand this scenario. Now, we have many motivational theories which describe why people not happy at workplace or at their with their family members, why they don't happy. Right? So if we have a theory, then we can understand now, we can explain why something happens, right? Why something happens. So therefore, we can describe a theory in a research as any concept that can be a concept or an instrument, model, or framework, which helps the researchers to think about or solve a problem, to describe a phenomenon, or to better understand a topic of interest. Right? So therefore, when we see a theory, that can be any concept, instrument, model, or framework, and it will help you to understand your phenomenon and to describe that in a better way. Right? So that is the role of the theory in the research. So therefore, these theories are formulated to explain, predict, and understand phenomena, and in many cases, to challenge and extend existing knowledge within the limits of critical bounding assumptions. Now, when we take some situations, we can identify that people have different kind of thinking, right? Now, for the same situation, same phenomena, sometimes your perception and my perception can be different. But if we have a clear-cut theory to explain this situation, that means if there a clear science behind this, then very easily we can explain this, we can predict this, and we can understand that phenomena. Right? So that is the role of theory in your research. Right? Now, just an example to explain this further. Now, I believe that all of you are from the social science background. So I have taken one example, some common management related example. So I believe that everyone can understand this theory. Now, when we take this situation, I explain you that sometimes you may have some problem in your workplace or with your family members, why these people are not happy. And then there are many theories in management to this to answer this question, why people not happy. Now, this is one of the theories available to explain these motivations, why people, how we can motivate our people, or how we can satisfy the people in the society. We identify that as Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. Right? Now, if you see this left side of this pyramid, right? So this gives you some general examples, and the right side explains you some organizational examples. Now, keep that aside. First, we'll understand what is this, what this says. Now, I'm not going to lecture you about Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, but I'm just giving you some idea of how we can use this theory into our research, right? Now, in this Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, it explains that people, we can satisfy our people into a hierarchical order, right? So that means only after they satisfied with their physiological needs, they will starting to think about safety needs, right? So once they accomplish safety needs also to some extent, then only they will starting to think about their social needs. Now, suppose that there is a person who need foods, right? That person is very hungry, then that people need some foods, right? If you go to that person and discuss about some insurance plan, will that work? Will that work? Right? There is a person with hunger and you are going to that person and discuss about an insurance plan, and you will explain him that you can develop your safety and everything after having this insurance, so therefore take this insurance. Can you satisfy that person with this insurance plan if that person don't have at least enough foods for their his day-to-day living? No, right? So that's what explained by the Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, right? So then people need safety needs, then social needs, then only they will think about their esteem needs. Once you accomplished all these needs, then finally you will come to your self-actualization needs, right? So here you will try to think about your achievements, right? So everything after fulfilling your basic needs, right? So this is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. So you can apply this to your home or to the general society and also to your working place. Now, if you want to do a research on why people are not satisfied at their workplace, or what are the factors that we have to identify, consider in motivating our employees in the workplace, then we can identify these as the factors. So we have to identify physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, esteem needs, self-actualization needs, right? According to this Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. Right now we have a base. Otherwise, what will happen? We know that people are not happy, but we don't know what are the factors that we have to consider. Right? Then you will think as you wish. Right? Whatever you think, you will include into your research as variables. Right? Then that will not work finally. Right? So that's why we have to bring theories into our research. This is just another example. We call this as theory of planned behavior. This explains that people's intention leads their behavior, right? So intention will depend on people's attitudes, the subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control, right? So therefore, if you want to now say that you are an employee, say that you are the marketing manager of a company, right? Then you want to identify the consumer's buying behavior, right? You want to do a research on consumers' buying behavior. Then you should know that the behavior is the driver of the intention, right? Then if you want to conduct a research on this behavior, then you have to see what are the available theories. Right? What are the available theories? Why? What is the reason? Because then only you can properly understand what are the factors that I have to bring into my research study. Right? Otherwise, again, you want to consider about the consumers' buying behavior, but you don't have any concrete platform to conduct your research. Then what you will do? You will go and take whatever you wish into your research, right? Then problems will arise when you are doing your research and you will not get correct results, right? So this is the role of theory, right? Here, I didn't go to explain you these theories, but I wanted to show you what is their role, right? So you have to understand that whenever you have some problem to sort out through a research, then it is better to search for available theories related to this area. Then only you can finally understand, you can finally see very good results in your research, right? Why? What is the reason? Because these theories are also developed through research studies. Then these theories are scientifically validated. Then if you want to explain some phenomenon, then it is better to understand a proper theory and to connect that with your research study. Right. Is it clear? The role of theory in research?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Right. Now we can see the need of theoretical or conceptual framework in your research. Right? There is a bit difference between the theoretical and conceptual terms, but I will explain you why, right? What is the need for a conceptual framework? So this is the main topic of today's discussion, right? So when you take a conceptual framework, so this is the reflection of your belief in your study, right? So this shows you what you believe in your study, what you are going to search in your study, right? So this is the conceptual framework. So this will shows or represent your beliefs on how certain phenomena are related to each other, and an explanation on why you believe that these variables are associated to each other, right? So in a conceptual framework, so therefore what you are going to do, you are going to show how different variables are connected to each other, right? How we are going to explain the change of one variable on another variable, right? So this is what the conceptual framework is explaining. So this is a reflection of your research problem, right? And also now you can show any relationships. If you collect some data set and if you input that data set into a software and run some regression analysis or any other kind of statistical analysis, then you will finally see some relationship. Definitely you will see some relationship, right? But is this relationship is true, or why this type of a relationship exists? To give that answer, you need the theories. Right now, in this example, in this picture, you can see the researcher believes that the job satisfaction is determined through job freedom and their salary. Right? The job satisfaction of a person is determined through the job freedom and the salary. Right? So this is the belief of the researcher. Right? So therefore, the researcher shows how these variables or these concepts are connected. Through arrows, this researcher shows how they are connected. Right? Then if someone asks, now say that finally you understood, yes, the job freedom is connected to job satisfaction and also the salary is connected to job satisfaction. If someone asks you why these are connected, now through your answer to the how question, you can nicely show, yes, these are connected. Then why these are connected, you can explain only through a theory, right? If you want to explain why these are connected, then there should be a proper theory behind your conceptual framework. So therefore, remember that when you are developing your conceptual framework, then it is better to understand proper theories related to your concept, right? Then only you can correctly build your conceptual framework, right? So if you see the second diagram or second picture, this is a regression. This is a regression equation, right? So can we identify this also as a conceptual framework? What do you say? Can we identify this second picture also as a conceptual framework? Right. I'll give you the answer. Now, this is not a conceptual framework, but this is also a method of your conceptualization, right? A method of conceptualization. So conceptualization means how you see your problem, right? How you see your problem or how you present your problem, right? So one method through a framework, through this kind of the diagram, you can show that. Or otherwise, you can use a regression equation to show this relationship, right? To show this relationship, you can use a regression equation, right? Usually in finance research, in accounting and finance research, and also sometimes in economics research, we mainly depend on the regression equation, or we call this as the econometric identification, than the conceptual framework, right? Having the equation only in your research is enough when it's come to that type of that finance economics research. But normally for other social science researchers, we thoroughly believe that providing the conceptual framework is better to show a better picture on your studies problem, right? So therefore, now you have to understand that theoretical or the conceptual framework reflects your research problem, and it explains how the variables in your study are connected with each other. And if you identified a theory, if you applied the theory in building this conceptual framework, then you will explain why this kind of association is existed. Now, if you take this example, now job satisfaction through job freedom and salary, right? So these variables related to job satisfaction, we could identify through motivational theories, because motivational theories explains the factors affected to job satisfaction. So therefore, you don't need to go and take whatever you want in your research. If you have theories, then you can very easily identify what are the factors affected, right? Okay. Then before going further, I will explain you. Now I told you if you have theories, then you can do this research, right? Then if you have theories, then why you want to do a research? Now Maslow explains that these are the factors that we have to see related to job satisfaction, right? And also there is another theory called that Herzberg's two-factor theory. It also explains how we can motivate our employees, right? If we have theories, then why we need a separate research? We can easily take that theory and apply to our problem, isn't it? Why we need to do a research then? Why we have to have a separate conceptual framework for our study? Why you can't go purely with that available theory? What is the reason? Right? Because when you take this theory or something derived through theory, that is the theoretical framework, this is a very broad scope. But we have to narrow down. When it's come to the conceptual framework, we have to further narrow down that, and we have to very specifically and without any ambiguity in definitions, we have to show what is our scope of the research. Because when you take a theory, it is a very broad concept. In our study, we will apply only a part of this theory, right? Then you have to correctly show this is the scope of my study and this is the broader theory, right? So you can explain the broader theory and you can identify and you can see how you derived your conceptual framework through this available theory, right? And when you take a theoretical framework, it derives from theories that already exist. But sometimes the conceptual frameworks we have to derive not only through the available theories, but sometimes we have to identify the empirical evidences. That means that's why we do a research, the literature review, right? So we have to apply both theories and the findings of the literature review in developing our conceptual framework, right? And also remember, in a research what we do, especially in a deductive research means quantitative research. I'm mainly explain about this deductive research, right? So in deductive research, what we do, we collect data set, maybe through primary data or through secondary data, right? Primary data means, for an example, you will go to your respondents and you will give some questionnaire and collect data, right? Secondary data means sometimes we have available sources, right? Maybe some database, or sometimes maybe the central bank report or some annual report of a company, right? Anything, right? Or World Bank statistics. Then we have already established statistics. Then we will collect them. So that is the secondary data. Then we will run our statistical analysis and we will finally identify our findings, right? So this is the method of quantitative research. So we identify that as a deductive research, right? So when it's come to inductive research or a qualitative research, that is not the method, right? Then in most of the times, right? When we do a research in the qualitative manner, we may not be able to identify proper theories behind that, right? Sometimes that may be the reason for doing a research in qualitative manner. Why? Because there's no theoretical backing, right? So therefore, most of the times, once you completed a qualitative research, you will come up with the theory, right? You will identify or find a new theory based on your research study. Right now, suppose that you have conducted a research in qualitative manner and finally derived a theory or a theoretical framework through your research findings. Right now, it is there. Okay, now it is there. Then what the quantitative researchers will do? Quantitative researchers will come and take your theoretical framework and they will collect data from a different context, right? Based on what you developed from your research study, right? Then they will collect data for this theoretical framework, right? Then they will, through their collected data, then they will run this study analysis and they will see whether the theoretical identification made through your study is true or not, right? So this is just a basic idea, right? So most of the time, these qualitative researchers will come up with new theories. Then quantitative researchers will go and take these theories and they will validate these theories, right, through a conceptual framework. So therefore, when you take the theoretical framework, it is a broader concept, right? It will provide the basic foundation for a research study. But when it's come to the conceptual framework, we have to narrow down that and we have to be very specific, right? There should be a definite structure, right? So we have to very correctly identify the specific variables because we cannot test the entire theory in our research, right? So then we are going to collect data and validate that theory, right? So it is the contribution to the knowledge, because we know in a research what we do, we always contribute to the knowledge. If there's no new contribution, then there's no research, right? Sometimes we can see when we take our undergraduate students, especially what they do, right? they will take the same study and one person do that to Mathura district, the other one do that for Galle district, Hambantota district, right, Anuradhapura district, Kandy district. So that is the newness of their research. Same thing, right? Then there's no new knowledge, right? So what we have to do, then how we can bring new knowledge, right? If it is a area which is not contextually proved, then you can take that and you can collect data and you can further validate that. But if there's any theory which is already validated by many researchers, then we have to see, are there any conflicts or contradictory arguments, right? If everyone says the same thing and if everyone validates that strongly, right, then there may no more research with that theory, right? So therefore, we have to identify what are where the gaps are existed, and you have to identify that area and you have to develop your conceptual framework through that, right? So that's why I told you always we are not going to test the entire theory, but we will identify what is the theory related to, what are the components related to our specific problem, and then based on that we have to develop our conceptual framework. Right. Now let's see how to develop the conceptual framework. Right. Before that, any questions? Right. If you have special questions, then even you can use the chat box, right? Right. Seems no questions, then we can further discuss this. When we develop the conceptual framework, what we have to do, first we have to identify and label the variables correctly. Right? First you have to identify and label the variables correctly. Right? So it is very important. Now, when we take this identification, how we can identify these variables? It is through our research problem, right? So therefore, before starting the conceptual framework, we have to understand what is the problem that we have, right? Sometimes students come to me also, especially the postgraduate students, they come up with the model or the framework, right? So means I want to test this model, right? So that is their question, right? Then when I ask why do you want to test this model, right? What is the reason? Why do you want to test this model? Then they don't have any answer, right? If you want to test a model, there should be a problem related to that. If there's no problem, then why you go and test that model? There's no point, right? So therefore, the starting point is the problem, not the model, right? So first identify what is your problem. Now I have a problem, right? What are the factors affecting the job satisfaction of people? And it is my problem. I say that when I go to my workplace, I can see most of the people are not happy. Then I want to see what factors affect actually for the job satisfaction. Right? Then I want to see what are the available theories to explain this. Right? Then I may come up with some theories. Right? Then once I identified more suitable theory for my research problem, right, problem that I have, then what I can do? Then I can collect data from my organization, because I don't know whether this theory exactly works with my organization. And then what I have to do? Then I have to collect data from my organization to test this theory and to see how I can apply the theoretical suggestions to solve my problem. Right? So therefore, the starting point is your problem. Okay. Now the problem here is the job satisfaction. Our problem is job satisfaction. And I want to see whether job freedom and salary are affected to job satisfaction of our employees. Right now I have variables. I identified some variables. Now I have to state the relationships among the variables. Right? Then once I identify and label the variables correctly, then the next step is I have to state the relationships among the variables. Right? To state the relationships, that means how this one variable affects the other variable. I have to formulate hypothesis for my study. Right? Hypothesis. I will explain what is the meaning of hypothesis later. Right? So as the second step, then we have to correctly identify the relationships among the variables. Okay. Then finally, we have to explain how or why you expect these relationships, right? Through findings. Now, remember, before identifying this conceptual framework, so therefore the key point is the identification of your research problem. Then you have to go through literature. So what is the purpose of doing a literature review? Purpose is to identify how other people, right, how other scholars in the past saw this same problem, right? So what were their suggestions? How they defined these relationships, right? What factors that they identified as factors affected to job satisfaction. So while you are doing this literature review, you can do a theoretical review as well. So you can combine both theoretical identifications and empirical identifications in developing your conceptual framework. Right? For an example, okay, so when we take our research, we have a research problem. And this research problem may be through just observations. As I told you, that means when you go to your workplace, you can see that people are not happy. Or otherwise there's no observation. But when you read, right, when you read research papers on job satisfaction, you may identify that some people identified some factors as the main factors for job satisfaction, but some other scholars identified no, those are not really affected, but there are some any other factors, right? So that kind of contradictory arguments can be there, contradictions, right? Then again, there can be a problem. Why? Because findings are inconclusive. Findings are inconclusive, right? So now there is a problem. Why? Because still it is inconclusive. Therefore, there is a room to do a research and to see why this is still inconclusive and how we can contribute into fill this vacuum, right? So that is why we are taking a research problem, right? So this is what actually you identify as the gap in your study. Right. Now, once you identified your problem through observations or through empirical identification or through your literature review or through a theory, which always in arguments, right? Sometimes there are theories, people still argue on this. That when you take the first theory that I explained, that theory of gravity, law of gravity, right? So there are some arguments on that, some critics on that. And also when it's come to the motivational theories, yes, for this Maslow's hierarchical theory, there are so many arguments, so many critics, right? So theoretical gaps also there, right? So therefore you can identify any of these issues or the gaps existed in your studies, right? Existed, and then you can identify that as your research problem, right? Then once you identified your problem, now you can do a thorough review on theories and empirical studies, that empirical reviews and theories, right? So you can identify what are the available theories and what are the empirical identifications related to your problem, right? So once you are, when you are doing this, especially this empirical identification, empirical review, through this you can identify these relationships, right? You can identify the relationships through your empirical review, right? So then what you have to do, finally, once you identified this empirical review, now you can identify your conceptual framework, right? So in the conceptual framework, through this empirical and theoretical review, you have to correctly identify your variables, right? And you have to label them. I will explain you how to label them in the conceptual framework. Then through this identification or through this review, you can develop your hypothesis, right? Then you will collect data and you will come up with your findings, right? So this is what we are going to do using our conceptual framework. I will tell you one of the common mistakes done by our students mainly, sometimes even postgraduate students, sometimes when it's come to PhD level, we see this at the very basic stages of their PhD proposals. There's no interconnection between your problem, theories, empirical reviews, and the conceptual framework derived. Problem says one thing, but the conceptual framework reflects a totally different picture, right? Then it is a problem. So therefore, remember, when you develop your conceptual framework, always you have to connect that with your research questions, right? That through the main problem that you have, you cannot connect it. That's why we have questions in our study, research question. It is to further narrow down our problem. Then through this narrow down questions, you can identify your conceptual framework, right? So mainly what you have to understand here, there should be a very clear link between this process. If the process is not interconnected, then you cannot come up with a good result finally. You will promise one thing at the beginning, but you will finally gives another totally different thing, right? So therefore, remember, problem, literature review, the conceptual framework should be interconnected. If there is a proper interconnection between these three, then definitely you will connect your findings with your research objectives, right? There's no problem, right? Okay, right. So this is how we have to start our conceptual framework. Now, before moving further with the conceptual framework, we should understand what is the meaning of variables, right? Right. May I know, is there any undergraduate level students in this discussion, in this workshop today? Are there any undergraduates?
Yes, madam.
Okay, right. Okay, then I will explain these basics as well, right? So when you take these variables, variable we can identify as any concepts or constructs that varies or change in value. That means when you take any concept in value, if they are varying, then we can identify that as a variable, right? So in my previous example, salary, right? So when you take salary, salary can be changed to person, or sometimes for the same person, when you take different years, salary may be changed due to increments or some more allowances. And job freedom also, entity to entity, person to person, job freedom can be different, right? So therefore, this type of concepts or constructs we can identify as a variable, right? So these values, as I explained, can differ at various times for the same object or person, or at the same time for different objects or persons, right? As you are related to social science faculty, you may have an idea about, say, the gross domestic production, right? Gross domestic production. So if it is the country Sri Lanka, now when we take the country Sri Lanka, so this is one object in research. This is one object in research. This is my variable, gross domestic production. So if you take information from 1960 to 2022, you will take different numbers for the same object over the year of time, right? You will get different values for the same object. Object is Sri Lanka. So this object is same. For the same object, you will get different values over a period of time, right? So normally, usually in research, we identify this type of a data set as a time series data set. This is a time series data set, right? And also, when we take some variables, say that you want to do a social research with ladies work in garment factories, right? You want to see their job satisfaction, right? You want to see the job satisfaction of the ladies in garment factories. Then you will select some garment factories and you will distribute your questionnaire among the lady labor workers, right? Then we can see that we have different objects, right? Why? Because say that you distributed this questionnaire among 100, right? Among 100, then now you have 100 objects, right? Each and every person we can identify as one object, right? In this case, in our second case, then when you take the job satisfaction information, right, you will collect this data for a particular time, right? Then there's no time period. මේ වගේ 60 ඉඳන් 2022ට job satisfaction එක ඇහුවොත් no one will say that, right? But if you ask the question, how you satisfy with your job at this time, now you will have an answer. But if someone asked you the question, what was your job satisfaction in 1960s or 1980s, then you may not have an answer, right? So therefore, remember, for this type of a social research, we have to collect data for a particular time, right? එක වෙලාවකට තමයි අපි data ටික collect කරන්නේ, not over a period of time, right? Then for this type of a variable, say that the variable is job satisfaction. For this job satisfaction, you will have values for different objects. Now, in my first case, different values for same object. Now what happened? Now I have again different values, but for different objects, right? If I have 100 people in my case, then I will have 100 different values for my job satisfaction variable, right? So therefore, if there is any concept or a construct that you can see different values over a time period for the same object or different values for different objects for the same time period, we can identify that as a variable, right? Is it clear? This is we can identify as a variable. When you go to advanced research methodology techniques, then sometimes you will see combination of these as well, right? Don't worry about that. I just want to give you a very brief idea about what is the meaning of a variable. Right? So when you take a social construct, if you can identify different values for different objects at a particular time period, or different values for the same object over a period of time period, then that construct or concept we can identify as a variable, right? Okay, so this is the meaning. Then when you take this variable, these variables can be discrete or continuous. Discrete variables mean, if I very simply explain you what is the meaning of discrete variable. In discrete variable, we can count, right? And it has an infinite value. Now, if I ask the question, number of how many, if I ask the question, how many members are in your family, right? That is number of family members. Then you have a discrete or count number, right? You may say, there is 4. You will not say 4.12. One family members like no, right? So you will have an exact count number, right? Then very simply, if I explain this, if it is a discrete number, then if I take from 0 to 9, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, likewise, there will no numbers in between these, right? That means 0 to 1, no numbers. 1 to 2, no numbers. 2 to 3, no numbers, right? So then we identify this type of a variable as a discrete variable. Or there can be continuous variables, right? If I ask the question about today's temperature, right, it will vary, and sometimes there's no stop, right? Why? Because time to time we can see this will vary, this will change, right? And we normally say that there is an infinite data set for a continuous variable. If you want to collect data for 100 years, then yes, you can see, and with different numbers, you will get this answer, right? Then we identify that type of a variable as a continuous variable, right? This is just to get some idea about the variables. It is not much related to conceptual framework identification, right? Now, when we take these variables, we have dependent variables. We identify that as criterion variable, and some variables we identify as independent variable or predictor variable, right? Criterion variable is another name that we give to dependent variable, right? Or we identify, and also there is an independent variable. So remember, when you develop your conceptual framework for your study based on a theory or based on some empirical identifications, definitely there should be a dependent variable and independent variable, right? I will explain you what is the difference, but to this moment, remember, definitely there should be a dependent variable and independent variable in your conceptual framework. And you have to correctly label what is your dependent variable and what is your independent variable, right? You have to correctly label them. And also, sometimes there can be moderating variables and mediating variables also in your research, right? Dependent, independent are must. If there's no dependent and independent, then there's no conceptual framework. But moderating and mediating will be based on your research questions or the objectives of your study, right? I cannot say that always we need to have moderating or mediating effect, right? But if you want to see, and if there are any such effects, then only you have to bring moderating, mediating variables also into your research, right? But remember, dependent, independent are compulsory, right? මතක තියාගන්න හැමෝම especially undergraduate level එකේ dependent independent කියන variables දෙකම අපේ model එකේ තියෙන්නම ඕනේ, right? Okay, so these are some examples. So you can see that we can have dependent variable and independent variable. What does that mean? This independent variable affects the dependent variable, right? Independent variable affects the dependent variable, right? In my previous example, salary affects job satisfaction. If I have high salary, then my job satisfaction will increase. That's what I want to say, right? My salary affects my job satisfaction, right? Then who will affect? It is my dependent variable, right? So, and also there can be mediator, moderator, everything. I will explain them later. So let's see what is this dependent variable. Remember, dependent variable is your problem, right? Dependent variable means your research problem, right? In my previous example, I wanted to see the job satisfaction of garment lady employees. Then my problem was the job satisfaction. Then dependent variable will be the job satisfaction. I want to see the job satisfaction as my primary interest. Then if there's that means that I have a problem with the job satisfaction. Now I want to see what factors will affect this job satisfaction. Then it is what I want to search, but my problem lies with the job satisfaction. මට ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙන්නේ කොහෙද job satisfaction එකේ? එහෙනම් job satisfaction එක තමයි වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැතුව තියෙන එක තමයි මගේ ප්‍රශ්නේ. දැන් මම බලන්න ඕනි මගේ මේ ප්‍රශ්නෙට බලපාන්නේ කවුද කියලා. Right? So that is my independent variables. I can identify them through literature review. Right? So when you take the dependent variable, so therefore remember, this is your problem and your variable of primary interest. And also remember that the purpose or the main objective of your research study should be to understand or predict or to explain the variability of this variable. එහෙම නේද? ඔයාට ඔයාගේ රිසර්ච් එකේ මොකක්ද ඇත්තටම කරන්න ඕනේ? මොකක්ද ඔයාගේ purpose එක? ඔයාට හැම වෙලේම ඕනේ වෙන්නේ මේ dependent variable එක මොකක්ද ඇත්තටම කොහොමද මේක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ? Right? So how it vary, right? You want to understand, you want to explain, and you want to predict this variability or the change of your dependent variable. Job satisfaction එක නම් job satisfaction එක කොහොමද වෙනස් වෙන්නේ කියන එක ඔයාලට තේරුම් ගන්න ඕනේ, predict කරන්න ඕනේ, කාට හරි explain කරන්න ඕනේ, right? So this is the objective of your research. So therefore remember always your primary problem or your main objective you have to identify as the dependent variable of your research, right? So when you analyze the dependent variable, you can find answers or you can find solutions to your research problem, right? So in you solve this, you will quantify or you will measure the dependent variable, and also you will see what other variables influence the dependent variable. These other variables which influence the dependent variable may be independent, may be moderators, or may be mediators, sometimes controls, right? Without having this knowledge, we cannot develop the conceptual framework, right? So therefore remember, we are going to answer to dependent variable. That is our problem, right? So you have to measure that, you have to quantify it, and you have to identify but other variables influence this variation. දැන් අපිට මේක ප්‍රශ්නයක් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ මොකක් හින්දාද? මේ job satisfaction එක කියන එක වෙනස්. එකිනෙකාට වෙනස්. හරිද? එහෙනම් අපි බලන්න ඕනේ අපේ මේ ප්‍රශ්නෙට බලපාපු හේතු මොනවද? හරිද? මේ හේතු අපේ conceptual framework එකේදී independent variable වෙන්න පුළුවන්, moderate variables වෙන්න පුළුවන්, mediate variables වෙන්න පුළුවන්, සමහර වෙලාවට control variables වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. Right? So this is the meaning of dependent variable. There are some examples for dependent variables. Right, we'll see. An applied researcher wants to increase the performance of bank employees in a particular bank. Right. Can someone tell me or send to the chat box what is the dependent variable in this first research problem? මේ තියෙන research problem හතරක්. කියන්න බලන්න පළවෙනි එකේ dependent variable එක මොකක්ද? These are the research problems. I told you problem will be reflected through your dependent variable. Right. Now, in our first scenario, what is the dependent variable? What is the dependent variable? Now you can see here the problem lies with the right? Problem lies with the performance of bank employees. This is my issue, right? Yeah, there is one answer, performance of bank employees. Very good, right? So this is the dependent variable. If you take the second one, the CEO of a company is concerned that the employees are not loyal to the organization and in fact seem to switch their loyalty towards other companies, right? So here my problem is related to employee loyalty, right? So we have to identify that as our dependent variable. When it's come to third one, a basic researcher is interested in investigating the debt to equity ratio. I'm not going to take, right, we'll take the debt to equity ratio of manufacturing companies in Western province. Right, I want to see the debt to equity ratio of manufacturing companies. Right, then my research problem is debt to equity ratio of manufacturing companies. Then I will take my dependent variable as what? Debt to equity ratio. Right, so therefore remember always, I will not take the fourth one because it is totally related to finance. So when you take, therefore remember, when you identify your dependent variable, it should reflect your research problem of this study. This is the reflection of your research problem. Right, then let's see the meaning of independent variable. Independent variable is the variable which directly influences the dependent variable in positive or negative way. And we don't know. Some variables influence positively, some negatively. Right? So therefore, when we identify the dependent variable, we know that the dependent variable will vary, but we don't know why and how. Right? How this varies, how this dependent variable change time to time will be explained through your independent variable. මේ dependent variable එක සැරෙන් සැරේට වෙනස් වෙන්නේ ඇයි කියන එකනේ අපිට ප්‍රශ්නේ. ඇයි වෙනස් වෙන්නේ කියන එක explain කරන්නේ කවුද? ඔයාගේ independent variable එක. Therefore, independent variable and dependent variable should covary. There should be a covariance between these two. And in simple terms, when we take any problem, we know that, right, problem is the effect. When we take any problem, we identify that as the effect. And මොකක්ද දැන් අපිට තියෙන effect එක job satisfaction එක. Job satisfaction එක තමයි effect එක. අපිට පේනවා අපේ company එකේ job satisfaction එක මොකක් හරි ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා. එහෙම නැත්නම් අපිට පේනවා මේ industry එකේම garment industry එකේම job satisfaction එක issue එකක් තියෙනවා. So this is the problem effect. Then we have to understand what is the cause for this effect. What are the causes? Right? What are the causes for this effect? Causes for this effect. Right? So when we identify our causes and effect, this effect will be our dependent variable and causes will be our independent variables. Right? So therefore we have to remember that before the effect, the cause will arrive. Cause will occur. නේද? effect එක වෙන්නේ පස්සේ ඉස්සෙල්ලා වෙන්න ඕනේ cause එක. මෙන්න මේක උන හින්දා තමයි effect එක වෙනස් වුනේ. හරිද? අපි හිතමුකෝ job satisfaction එක අඩු වෙලා කියලා. එහෙනම් job satisfaction එක අඩු වුනේ මොකක් වුණ හින්දාද? salary එක කපපු හින්දා. right? pay layoff එක හින්දා තමයි අපේ job satisfaction එක අඩු වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. right? Then salary will be the independent variable. Job satisfaction will be the dependent variable. Right? And if someone asks why, right, how this effect, you can explain. Right? You can say that salary is positively affect the job satisfaction. When salary increases, job satisfaction also will increase. You will say that. Then if someone asks why, then you need theory. Right? That's why I told you when you are identifying this dependent and independent variable, dependent variable is definitely your problem. Then when you identify any independent variables related to your dependent variable, this identification should be backed through theories and empirical evidences. Right? Otherwise, there will not be any logical explanation to your relationships. එහෙම නැත්නම් ඔයාලා එක එක relationships identify කරගනි ඒ උනාට meaning එකක් නැහැ. ඕනෙම numbers දෙකක් දෙපැත්තට දාලා run කරොත් relationship එකක් පෙන්නනවා. Right? But to be a meaningful relationship, always remember there should be a logical explanation. That's why you have to identify your independent variables always through your literature review and theoretical backing. Right? It's a must. Right? And also remember, now say that very simply, my main objective is to see whether salary affects the job satisfaction. මට මේන්ලිම බලන්න ඕනේ හිතන්නකො salary එක job satisfaction එකට affect වෙනවද කියලා. ඒක තමයි මට තියෙන ප්‍රශ්නේ. මට වෙනේම අදාළම නැහැ. මට job freedom එක වැඩකුත් නැහැ වෙන කිසිම දෙයක්. Right? I will not consider any other things. I just want to see whether salary affects the job satisfaction. What is the reason? Because I can see that in this industry, there is a big job satisfaction problem. People are leaving the organizations. Then I want to see if I increase the salary level of this field, will it solve the problem? Right? Will that solve the problem? Okay, so that's what you want to see. Then when you go through literature and theories, you can see not only this salary, there are some other possible factors which affect job satisfaction. Right? Not only salary, but I want to see only the relationship between this salary and the job satisfaction. මට අදාළම නැහැ අනිත්‍යව. මම අනිත්‍යව කරන්න යන්නේ මට ඕනේ salary එක ටිකක් වැඩි කරොත් මේක මේ ප්‍රශ්නෙට උත්තරයක් හම්බෙයිද කියලා බලන්න විතරයි. ඒ වුණාට theories වලින් සහ empirical investigation වලින් suggest කරනවා salary අරින්න තව සෑහෙන දේවල් තියෙනවා job satisfaction එකට බලපාන කියලා. Then you have to identify them as well. And you have to identify them as control variables in your research. Right? Then what you have to do when you develop your conceptual framework with our example, now your problem is job satisfaction. This is your problem, job satisfaction. So therefore, I told you always label your problem as the dependent variable. In your research, take the conceptual framework and identify your problem and label that as dependent variable. Then your hypothesis, what you believe. You believe that only through pay increases, we can change this job satisfaction. Therefore, you will identify salary as your independent variable. Right? So this will be your independent variable. How did you identify that? You identified this through your literature review. Right? Salary. Now you want to show to your reader salary affects job satisfaction. If you want to show that, you have to draw an arrow from salary to job satisfaction. Now it's very clear salary affects job satisfaction. So this is my conceptual framework. But at the same time, literature and the available theories suggest that not only salary, some other things also affects the job satisfaction very significantly. Then I have to identify them as well in my study. I have to identify them. Say that job freedom. Suppose that these are the variables, maybe job freedom and work condition. And say that recognition. Right? So these are some other variables which affect your dependent variable, your research problem. But you are not going to check that in your research. ඔයාට මේ ටික research එකේ check කරන්න අවශ්‍යතාවයක් නැහැ. හරිද? හැබැයි literature කියනවා ඔය ටිකත් මේකට බලපානවා කියලා. Then what we have to do, we have to identify this kind of variables in our research as control variables. Right? In your conceptual framework, you can show the control variables also with your independent variables. Right? So either you can show this here or otherwise you can show the control variables here, no problem, but you don't need to just label it as control variables, but you don't need to, remember you don't need to draw any arrow, right? You don't need to draw any arrow because you are not going to see any relationship in your study. But still you want to control them in your study. So therefore, you have to show in your conceptual framework that you are going to control them. Right? And when you run your statistical analysis, remember you have to collect data for these variables as well. Otherwise, you cannot control. ඔයාගේ statistical analysis එක කරනකොට control variables වලට data collect කරන්න ඕනේ. ඒ කරලා ඒකත් ඔයාගේ regression එකට දාලා run කරන්න ඕනේ. හරිද? But you have to separately show them as control variables. And then the readers know that the researcher wanted to see only how salary affects the job satisfaction. They didn't want to see how freedom, work condition, or recognition, or any other variables which explains why the theories are affected to the job satisfaction. But they correctly identified that other variables also and control them in the model, right? And also remember, it is not required you to explain these relationships in your findings. You can just bring them into the discussion, but you don't much want to worry about your control variables. But remember, when you develop your conceptual framework, if there's any high significant variables which affect your research problem other than the independent variable, then identify them correctly and bring them into the conceptual framework. You don't want to bring everything, just identify what are the very most significant factors identified through empirical studies and control them in your model. Theory එකෙන් ගොඩාක් දේවල් කියයි. Theory එක ඒකයි මම කිව්වේ අර theoretical identification එකයි conceptual framework එකයි කියන්නේ දෙකක්. Theory එකේ variables සමහරට 50ක් කියලා ඇති. Conceptual framework එකට 50ම ගේන්න එපා. ඔයා ඒකට තමයි අපි literature review එකක් කරන්නේ. Empirically මේක test කරලා මේ theory test කරලා identify කරලා තියෙනවා. මේ factors ගොඩක් කියලා තිබුණාට මෙන්න මේ ටික විතරයි ඇත්තටම මේකට highly බලපාන්නේ. එහෙනම් එන්නේ ඒ කියපු ටික විතරයි වාගේ මොඩල් එකේ control කරන්න ගේන්න ඕනේ. Right? So this is the meaning of independent and dependent variable.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
So now the time is 10:30. So if you want, ma'am, you can take about a 15-minute break and meet around 10:45 and continue.
Okay, that's fine. If the participants also want a break, then I can give that. No problem.
Right. So then, ma'am, we'll take a break now and meet again at 10:45.
Sure. Right. Okay. Thanks. Is everyone back?
Yes, ma'am, I think so.
Yeah, okay. So then let's continue, right? Okay. I think now you have some idea about how to use dependent and independent variables and also the control variables in your research study at the conceptual framework, right? Now there are some examples for independent variable. If I just explain them now, if you take the first scenario, research studies indicate that successful new product development has an influence on the stock market price of the company. Now, in this one, the stock market price is the research problem. So you can identify this as the dependent variable. And it says, these research studies indicate that successful new product development has an influence on the stock market price. Now, if you want to see whether this is correct, what you can do, you can also collect data on new product development and stock market price, and you can see the statistical relationship. Now, if you take this into a conceptual framework, then the new product development will be your independent variable. Stock market price will be your dependent variable. Right? If we take the final one, a manager believes that good supervision and training will increase the production performance of workers. Now, it is the belief of the managers. Right? Managers think that if we have a good supervision and training, then we can increase the production performance of workers. Now, then what is the problem with the managers? How to increase the production performance of workers? Then production performance of workers will be the dependent variable because it is the problem. Then managers believe that through good supervision and training, we can increase the production performance. Then supervision, training will be independent variables of this study. Right? So in that case, if we take the final one only, just to get some idea. Now, this is a belief of the manager. Now, we want to statistically check, can we increase the production performance of workers through good supervision and training? Then what we can do, we can identify our research problem, that is the production performance of workers, and manager believe that through supervision and training, he can increase this. Therefore, we can identify these two, supervision and training. These are two things. Supervision and training are not the same, right? There can be good training, but no good supervision, right? So therefore, supervision and training, we can identify as independent variables. So since this supervision and training influence the production performance of workers, we identified the arrow from IV to DV. Right. So in this example, now you can see in this picture, you can see what is the relationship between IV and DV. Right. So therefore, remember, dependent variable always affected by the changes in independent variable. If you do some change to the independent variable, the dependent variable also will change. Right now, in this example, you can see, right? So if you add more water and if you give sunrise and also if you give oxygen to this plant, then plant will grow, right? So the growth of the plant is our dependent variable. Then what you input as fertilizer and other essential things to the tree, to the plant, will be the independent variable. So this is the relationship. This is what you are going to do in your social science research as well, right? So finally, your action to the independent variable will change your dependent variable as well, right? Now here you can see two examples for IV-DV relationship. Income affects the consumption, right? Your income will affect your consumption, right? And here can you see not only one independent variable, there are 4 independent variables, and it will affect the SME's performance. Now, my research problem then what? In this second one, SME's performance. I want to see how small and medium enterprises performance will change. උඩා හා මධ්‍ය පරිමාණ ව්‍යාපාරවල performance change වෙන්නේ කොහොමද කියලා තමයි මට ප්‍රශ්නේ තියෙන්නේ. හරිද? එතකොට මම රිසර්ච් වල පරණ රිසර්ච් කියවුවාම මට පේනවා maybe due to entrepreneurship orientation or due to human resource management, their marketing orientation, due to their information and communication technology. These are the major reasons. Then I will identify them as my independent variables, and I will draw my conceptual framework directing that to the SME's performance. Right? I will later explain what is this H1, H2, H3, and H4. For the time being, now you can see that sometimes in your conceptual framework, there can be one IV and one DV. Sometimes you can see for your research problem or for your DV, there can be more than one independent variable, right? Right. Now, if we want to draw the conceptual framework for this case, research studies indicate that successful new product development has an influence on the stock market price of the company. That is, more successful the new product turns out to be, higher will be the stock market price of the firm. Right? So this is my research problem. Right? I want to see whether successful new product development has an influence on the stock market price. Then here we can identify the independent variable as success of the new product or new product success, and the dependent variable is the stock market price. So this is how, after we identified these two variables correctly, we can easily draw our conceptual framework. Then the second one, cross-cultural research indicates that managerial values govern the power distance between superiors and subordinates. Right? So managerial values govern the power distance between superiors and subordinates. Managerial values මත තීරණය වෙනවලු superiors සහ subordinates ලා අතර තියෙන power distance එක. හරිද? එතකොට power distance තමයි dependent variable එක. Power distance is our dependent variable, and managerial values is the independent variable. Right? So then very easily, once you identify your independent and dependent correctly, then you can very easily draw your conceptual framework. Right. Now we have identified the meaning of dependent variable and also the independent variable. We can now move on to moderating and mediating variable. Right? So remember, as I told you earlier as well, DV and IV also will be there, but moderating, mediating, only sometimes we can see in the research. Right. So if we see the moderating variable, I will not take this too much technical terms to explain this, but very simply I will explain you what is the meaning of the moderating variable. Sometimes when you take these two relationships, right, that means IV and DV relationship, there can be some other variables who will come and change the relationship. Right now, for an example, for a very simple example, now suppose that right. So this is something like that. Now, this is you, right? And you have your intentions, right? You have your intentions, and your intention will decide your behavior. ඔයා හිතන විදිහට ඔයා හිතන විදිහට තමයි ඔයාගේ behavior එක තීරණය වෙන්නේ. හරිද? ඔයා ඉන්න ඔයාගේ intention එක මත ඔයාගේ behavior එක තීරණය වෙනවා. ඔයා හිතන විදිහ වෙනස් වෙනකොට ඔයාගේ behavior එක වෙනස් වෙනවා. හරිද? එතකොට සමහර වෙලාවට ඔයාගේ intention එක behavior එක තීරණය කරගෙන ඉන්න වෙලාවේ අපි හිතමු ඔයාගේ හොඳම යාළුවා මෙතනට ඇවිල්ලා ඔයාගේ හොඳම යාළුවා මෙතනට ඇවිල්ලා ඔයාට මේ සම්බන්ධව බලපෑමක් කරනවා. අපි හිතමු right, so now you are in a very aggressive mood. Right, because you believe that, right, you believe that say that you have got some punishment, right? You have got some punishment and your intention is it is not deserved you, right? You don't need to get that punishment. So therefore you will behave very aggressively. But at that time, your friend will come and explain you the background, and he will give you some sort of explanation to change your mood or to change your intention. Then what will happen? Your behavior will change. What is the reason? Reason is the intervention of your friend. Friend will come and change your intention to behavior relationship. හරිද? ඔයාට punishment එකක් දුන්නා ඔයා හිතනවා මේක මම punish වෙන්න ඕන තරම් නෙමෙයි කියලා. ඔයා හැම ඉඳගෙන ඔයා aggressive behave වෙනකොට ඔයාගේ යාළුවා ඇවිල්ලා යම් කිසි විදිහකට ඔයාව වෙනස් කරනවා නම් ඔයා වෙනස් වුණේ ඔයාගේ intention එකෙන්ද නැහැ. හරිද? ඔයා වෙනස් වුණේ මොකක් හින්දාද? ඔයාගේ behavior එක change වුණේ මොකක් හින්දාද? ඔයාගේ යාළුවා intervene කරපු නිසා. right? එතකොට මෙන්න මේ වගේ වෙලාවකට අපි කියනවා ඔයාගේ මේ යාළුවා ඇවිල්ලා කරපු දේ moderate effect එකක් කියලා. මෙන්න මෙහෙම එකක් තමයි අපි moderate කෙනෙක් කියලා හඳුනගන්නේ. Right? So that means if another variable, if a third variable intervene and change the relationship between IV and DV, we identify that as a moderate variable. That means there is a relationship between two, right? Then a third one come and change that relationship. Maybe the strength or maybe the direction. හරිද? සමහර වෙලාවට තුන්වෙනි පාර්ශවයක් මැදිහත් වෙලා මොකද කරන්නේ? මේ දෙන්න අතර තිබ්බ relationship එක positive තිබ්බ එක negative relationship එකක් කරන්නත් පුළුවන්. That means directional change එකක් වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. එහෙම නැත්නම් සමහර ලාවට පොඩියට තිබ්බ relationship එකක් වැඩි වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. එහෙම නැත්නම් ලොකුවට තිබ්බ relationship එකක් අඩු වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. That means there can be directional changes or changes to the strength of this relationship, right? Due to that moderation, right? So you have some existed relationships, but a third variable come and change the direction or the strength of this relationship. Then we identify that as a moderate variable, right? So when we take this moderate variable, that can be a quantitative variable or a qualitative variable, and anyhow it will affect the direction and or strength of the IV-DV relationship, right? So therefore we can see that when there is a moderating variable, it will modify the original relationship between the IV and DV. Once a moderator variable come into your conceptual framework, remember, you cannot see the original relationship in your model, right? Because the third variable come and change your original relationship, right? So this is how we show this in the conceptual framework. So we have our independent variable, right? So we have our, this is our problem. So we have our dependent variable. Then we identified that there are some factors which affect our dependent variable. So we identify them as independent. And we identified that there is a relationship between these two. But at the same time, some people says that even though you have that relationship, if something happen, then this relationship will change. That something happen is the moderator variable. If something happen, then your relationship will change, right? Then we identify them as moderator variables, so moderating effects in our research studies. Right now, you can see one example. Usually, based on the number of books that you read, your reading ability will increase, right? People can say that number of books will affect the reading ability. When you read more books, your reading ability will increase, right? And at the same time, there is another understanding in society. What is that? When the parents are high literal, that will affect this relationship. ඒ කියන්නේ මොකද්ද? මම කොච්චර පොත් කිව්වත් මම පොත් කියවනකොට සාමාන්‍යයෙන් මගේ රීඩින් ඇබිලිටි එක වැඩි වෙනවා. හැබැයි ඒ වෙලාවෙම මගේ පේරන්ට්ස්ලා හයි ලිටරල් පේරන්ට්ස්ලා නම් ඉන්නේ මට මේ රිලේෂන්ෂිප් එක තව දුරටත් වැඩි වෙන්න පුළුවන් කියලා කියනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ මම පොත් කියවනකොට රීඩින් ඇබිලිටි එක වැඩි වෙනවට වඩා සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ඒ රිලේෂන්ෂිප් එකට වඩා මගේ පේරන්ට්ස්ලාගෙනුත් මේකට එයාලගේ ලිටරල් ලෙවල් එක වැඩි නම් මගේ රීඩින් ඇබිලිටි එක තව දුරටත් වැඩි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එහෙම නැත්නම් ඒක අඩුයි නම් මගේ මම කොච්චර පොත් කියුවත් සමහර විට ඒ වැඩි වෙන වේගයෙන් මගේ reading ability එක වැඩි නොවෙන්න පුළුවන්. Right? So this is we identify as a moderator variable. Now there is another example. People believe that training and development will provide high employee performance. When you give more training and developments to your employees, they will perform well. At the same time, some people says that, but this will not equal for both male and female. හරිද? අපේ රිලේෂන්ෂිප් එකක් තියෙනවා. ට්‍රේනින් දුන්නාම අනිවාර්යෙන් performance වැඩි වෙනවා. හැබැයි මේ performance වැඩි වෙන වේගය මේල්ස්ලටයි ෆීමේල්ස්ලටයි එක සමාන නැහැ. ඒ කියන්නේ මොකක්ද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ? ජෙන්ඩර් කියන එක මැදට ආපුවාම employee performance කියන එක වෙනස් වෙනවා කියලා කියනවා. අපි training and development දුන්නාම employees ලගේ performance වැඩි වෙනවා තමයි. හැබැයි අපි gender එක consider කරොත් මේගොල්ලෝ males ලා වෙනකොට කොහොමද වැඩි වෙන්නේ? females ලා වෙනකොට කොහොමද වැඩි වෙන්නේ? එතන වෙනසක් තියෙනවද කියන එක consider කරොත් එතන වෙනසක් එනවා කියලා ඔයා believe කරනවා නම් then we have to identify this gender as a moderator variable. That means when you start to consider gender will affect this relationship, then you have to identify that as a moderator relationship. Right? So if you have this kind of a conceptual framework, then what you have to do, first you have to forget about this moderator. First forget about this moderator first check what is the relationship between training and development and employee performance. Right? Then after that, you can bring gender as well. First, we should see the original relationship. Then we can see when gender also come into our model, then whether this relationship will be affected directional wise or strength wise. Right? So this is what we have to see with our moderator relationship. හරි එතකොට තේරෙනවද මොඩරේට් එකක් කියන එක එන්නේ කොහොමද රිලේෂන්ෂිප් එකක් තියෙනවා හැබැයි වෙන තුන්වෙනි වේරියබල් එකක් කන්සිඩර් වෙද්දි මේ රිලේෂන්ෂිප් එක වෙනස් වෙනවා හරිද වෙන වේරියබල් එකක් නිසා අපේ තියෙන රිලේෂන්ෂිප් එක වෙනස් වෙනවා නම් අර පිටින් එන වේරියබල් එක අපි අඳුර ගන්නවා මොඩරේටර් රිලේෂන්ෂිප් එක කියලා මතක තියාගන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා අපි ඔරිජිනල් රිලේෂන්ෂිප් එක චෙක් කරලා ඉන්න ඕනේ ඊට පස්සේ තමයි අපි බලන්නේ moderator variable but in your study you can have only one conceptual framework to show all the relationships. Don't draw different conceptual frameworks. You have to identify all the possible relationships in your study and you have to show them graphically through your conceptual framework. Right. So this is another example. So here you can see employee performance is our dependent variable. So you can name them, right? So you can name them dependent variable, right? And we have three independent variables called rewards, fairness, and work environment. That means rewards. Now you can see three separate arrows. That means rewards change the employee performance, fairness, that means job fairness, change the employee performance, and work environment also will change the employee performance, right? And research says that, yes, it is true, but all these relationships will depend on their job satisfaction. මේ rewards දුන්නාම මිනිස්සු වැඩ කරන එක fairness job එකේ ඇතුලේ හැමෝටම එක විදිහට සැලකනකොට performance වැඩි වෙනවා work environment එක හොඳ වෙද්දි performance වැඩි වෙනවා ඇත්ත තමයි හැබැයි මේ හැම එකක්ම වෙනස් වෙනවා job satisfaction එක මත එහෙනම් මොකද්ද වෙන්නේ job satisfaction එක මේ relationships moderate කරනවා හරිද කොච්චර rewards දුන්නත් job එකකින් satisfy නැත්නම් සමහර වෙලාවට employee performance එක අඩු වෙන්න පුළුවන්. එන්නේ ඒකයි මෙතනදී කියන්නේ. Right? So therefore when you take the moderator relationship, first we have to identify what is the original relationship, then we have to see if the third variable comes and influence, then what would be the change to our relationship. Right? If you have any questions, please ask, right? If it is not, if you cannot understand this, then again, please ask. Right. There is a example. There is an example for IVDV and moderator relationship. Read this and try to understand what are the relationships explained here. And then we can draw our conceptual framework for this example. It says that a prevalent theory is that the diversity of the workforce. Diversity means people with different ethnic origins, races, nationalities. And the workforce is diverse. ජාතිවල ආගම්වල එක nationalities වල මිනිස්සු අපේ workforce එක ඇතුළේ ඉන්නවා. Right? Then it contributes more to the organizational effectiveness. මෙතන කියනවා මොකද්ද? When the workforce is diverse, your organizational effectiveness will increase. Right? So this is what theory says. Theory says that if your workforce is diverse, then organizational effectiveness will increase. Why? Because each group brings its own special expertise and skills to the workplace. ඇයි එහෙම වෙන්නේ? ඇයි එහෙම වෙන්නේ? එහෙම වෙන්නේ මේ workforce එක diverse වෙන්න මිනිස්සුන්ගේ තියෙන different expertise skills workforce එක ඇතුළට එනවා. හරිද? දැන් අපි ගත්තාම Sri Lankan Sinhalese, right? Then Sri Lankan Tamils, then maybe Chinese, Japanese. When it's come to different nationalities and ethnic groups, they have their own special expertise and skills, right? What I have as a skill may not have with a Chinese person, right? But what Japanese have as a skill may not have with me, right? So, but if we can bring all together, then we can give more effectiveness to our organization. So that's what this theory explains, right? However, again, so this we identify as the synergy. However, only if managers know how to harness the special talents of the diverse work group, otherwise they will remain untapped. Right? However, even though we have different people in our workforce, we can bring this synergy only if managers know how to take it. හරිද? එහෙම නැත්තම් මේක වෙන්නේ නැහැ. දැන් අපිට ඉන්නවා ජැපනීස්ලාත් ඉන්නවා චයිනීස්ලාත් ඉන්නවා ශ්‍රී ලංකන්ස්ලා ඉන්නවා ටැමිල් ඉන්නවා සිංහලීස් ඉන්නවා මුස්ලිම්ස් ඉන්නවා. We have everyone in our workforce. Then managers should know how to bring each talent. Manager ගේ skill එක මත තමයි අපි කොච්චර දුරට මේකට contribute වෙනවද කියන එක අන්තිමට තීරණය වෙන්නේ. Right? So this is a theory and we'll see how we can draw a conceptual framework based on this theoretical explanation. Right? Okay. So first we have to identify what is the independent variable and dependent variable of this one. Right? So we can see that what is our final target? Organizational effectiveness. We want to see how we can increase the organizational effectiveness. Then our dependent variable will be organizational effectiveness. And what is the independent variable? Can someone tell me? Independent variable? Independent variable here is මොකද්ද බලපාන organizational effectiveness එකට? Workforce diversity. Workforce එක diverse වෙදි තමයි organizational effectiveness එක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ. Right? Yes, it is in the chat box. Good. Right? Workforce diversity is the independent variable and dependent variable is the organizational effectiveness. Right? And it says, yes, workforce diversity will affect the organizational effectiveness. However, this relationship will change on what? මේ relationship එක වෙනස් වෙන්න බලපාන සාධකයක් තියෙනවා. මෙයා මෙයාට බලපානවා තමයි. ඒ කියන්නේ අපේ diverse workforce එකක් ඉන්නකොට අනිවාර්යෙන් අපේ මේ organizational effectiveness එක වැඩි වෙනවා තමයි. මේ වැඩි වෙන වේගය වැඩි වෙන්න හරි අඩු වෙන්න හරි බලපාන තව සාධකයක් තියෙනවා. ඒ මොකක්ද? What is that? This relationship finally will depend on what? It will depend on managers' skills. Very good, right? It will depend on managers' skills, right? So therefore, here we can identify independent variable as workforce diversity, dependent variable as organizational effectiveness, and moderating variable as managerial expertise. Right? So once you identified these three variables correctly through, now you can see here, we identified this through a theory. Right? So once you identified this through theory or empirical identification, now we can draw our conceptual framework. So you can see here, it labels the variables as dependent, independent, and correct and also moderating, and correctly label the variables as, correctly identify the variables, organizational effectiveness, workforce diversity, and moderating as managerial expertise. So you can see how we draw this arrow. If you draw an arrow from a variable to the relationship, here the relationship is shown by this arrow between IV and DV. එම්බලේ මතක තියාගන්න relationship එක පෙන්වන්නේ මෙන්න මේ arrow එකෙන්. This මේ arrow එකේ head එක ඔයා දාන්නේ කොහෙටද? Everything now very important when you develop your conceptual framework. Right, so workforce diversity to organizational effectiveness. So this is our original relationship. Then we identified that yes, this original relationship will finally change due to the managerial expertise. So therefore, it will affect to relationship. Then me managerial expertise එක බලපාන්නේ workforce diversity එකටත් නෙමෙයි, organizational effectiveness එකටත් නෙමෙයි, මොකටද බලපාන්නේ? මේ දෙන්න අතර තියෙන relationship එකට. That's why you have to draw this arrow from your moderating variable to this relationship arrow. වෙන තැනකට ඔය ඊතලයේ ගැහුවොත් වැරදි. Right, so if you have this type of conceptual framework, then very easily you can understand, yes, workforce diversity affects organizational effectiveness. However, this relationship will moderate by the managerial expertise. Right? So this is how you can bring the moderator variable to your conceptual framework. Right. Next one is bringing the mediating variable into our conceptual framework. Right? Now, mediating, when we identify a mediating variable, it explains why there is a relationship between IV and DV. Right? Why there is a relationship. Now, if you take the same example, can someone tell me why there is a relationship between diversity of workforce and organizational effectiveness? Why? What is the reason? Why there is a relationship between diversity of the workforce and organizational effectiveness? Yes. It is because of synergy. Right? It is because of synergy. මෙතන කියනවා. Right? Theory එකේ කියනවා workforce diversity එක බලපානවා කියලා organizational effectiveness එකට. Because why? Each group brings its own special expertise and skills to the workforce. That is the reason. Right? So we identify that as the synergy effect. Right? When people get together, then we can do something more. Right? So what does that mean? What does that mean? In other words, that means if there's no synergy, that means if these people does not bring their special expertise and skills to the workforce, then we will not see this relationship. Right? So therefore, this relationship finally depends on that synergy. Right? මේ දෙන්න අතර මේ relationship එක ඇත්තටම බලනකොට හැදිලා තියෙන්නේ මොකක් හින්දාද? මේ relationship එක අපිට එකපාර දකින්නලා පුළුවන් එකක් නෙමෙයි. අපි මෙහෙම මේ එකපාර ඉස්සෙල්ලා ඇඳට ඇත්තටම workforce diversity එක organizational effectiveness එකට බලපානවා. ඒ කොහොමද? කියන ප්‍රශ්නේ කෙනෙක්ට එන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ මොකද මේක මෙතන directly එකපාරටම workforce diverse වුණා කියලා organizational effectiveness එක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Right? අපිට හේතුව කියලා තියෙනවා theory එකේ. හේතුව කියනවා if these people brings their diverse skills then only organizational effectiveness will change with managerial expertise, right? So therefore, in this one, we can identify that as a mediating variable. Mediating variable means now, yes, in between IV and DV, there is a relationship. However, to build up this relationship, there is a strong reason. මේ දෙන්න අතර relationship එකක් හැදිලා තියෙනවා තමයි. හැබැයි මේ relationship එක හැදිලා තියෙන්නේ තව කෙනෙක් හරහා. මේ කෙනා හිටියේ නැත්තම් මේ relationship එක හැදෙන්නේ නැහැ. Right? There is a relationship now, but there is some unseen person in between this relationship. Moderator එකේ මොකද උනේ? ආ කෙලින්ම ඇවිල්ලා ওই දෙන්නගේ relationship එකට attack කරනවා. Mediator මොකද කරන්නේ? මේ දෙන්න අතර relationship එකක් තියෙනවා. හැබැයි ඒ relationship එක හැදුනේ යා හරහා. එයා ඇවිල්ලා මේකට affect කරා නෙමෙයි. එයා හරහා තමයි මේක හැදුනේ. අපි හිතමු right, let's say that there is that this is say Kumari. This is Kumari. Right? And say this is Renuka. Right? Now Kumari and Renuka are good friends. Say that Renuka and Kumari are very good friends. Okay? But people know that first Kumari was a friend of Manjula. Kumari was a friend of Manjula. Right? And Manjula was a friend of Renuka. Now only through Manjula they came to know each other and now they are friends. If Manjula were not there, then this friendship will not build. Right? So this is how we can identify the mediator relationship. Right? Then it is not the moderator. Manjula will not moderate their relationship. Sometimes Manjula can act as the moderator as well. Conceptual framework එකම variable එක mediate කරන ගමන් moderate කරනවා. එහෙම වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. Manjula මේ දෙන්න අතර relationship එක හදන ගමන් ඒ relationship එකට බලපෑම් කරන්න පටන් ගත්තොත් අන්න එයා moderator කෙනෙකුත් වෙනවා. හරිද? එයා වෙනම බලපෑමක් කරන්නේ නැතුව මේ relationship එක ගොඩනගන්න විතරක් මැදිහත් වෙනවනම් එයා mediator කෙනෙක්. Right? So therefore we can identify the mediator as why there is a relationship. Right? Mediator explains why there is a relationship between IV and DV. Right? Is it clear? The difference between mediator and moderator, is it clear? Clear or not clear? Anyone?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. Right. Okay. Right. So then we'll see the same example. Right. We'll take the same example and let's see how we can identify the mediator in our same conceptual framework. So in our previous example, we identified that creative synergy plays the role of the mediating variable. Right? Why? Because we identified that, yes, now there is a diversity, there is a relationship between diversity and the performance, or the effectiveness. However, if there were no creative synergy, right? So why there is a relationship between these two? Because of the creative synergy. Right? Because of the creative synergy. So therefore, through that we can understand how workforce diversity brings organizational effectiveness. Right? If we brings only this creative synergy into model, then only people can understand, right, now it is clear. That's how workforce diversity brings organizational effectiveness. Right? Otherwise, it is just like a relationship between two variables. Right? Once you show the creative synergy, as a mediator in your model, then it is very clear to the reader, right? Workforce diversity affects the organizational effectiveness through this synergy. Right? Now it is clear. Right? So therefore, what you can do, you can redraft your conceptual framework like this. Workforce diversity is there. Creative synergy, right? When you have workforce diversity, then it will affect the creative synergy. And අපිට එක ජාතිය මිනිස්සු ඉන්නකොට අන්න ඒගොල්ල මිනිස්සු ඉන්නකොට ඒකෙන් සිනර්ජි කියලා දෙයක් ඇති වෙනවා. අන්නේ සිනර්ජි එකෙන් තමයි effectiveness එක ඇති වෙන්නේ. එහෙම නැතුව diverse වුණා කියලා effectiveness වෙන්නේ නැහැ. හරිද? මේ creative synergy තමයි මේ දෙන්නගේ මැදට ඇවිල්ලා මේ දෙන්න අතර relationship එකක් හදලා තියෙන්නේ. Right? Okay, now can you tell me what happened to that managerial expertise? අපි කියවනේ හරි workforce diversity එක තියෙනවා. හරිද? ඒකෙන් මෙහෙම creative synergy එකක් ඇති වෙන්න නම් මොකද වෙන්න ඕනි කිව්වේ? workforce diversity එකයි creative synergy එකයි ඇති වෙනවා තමයි. හැබැයි මේක හරියටම ඇති වෙන්න නම් මොකද වෙන්න ඕනේ? managers ලා ඇවිල්ලා මේ දෙන්නගේ relationship එකට බලපෑම් කරන්න ඕනේ. නේද? එහෙම නැත්නම් otherwise there will no relationship. Right? The relationship will be there, but you will not get the essence of this relationship. You will not get the maximum of this relationship. Definitely, there will be a relationship between workforce diversity and creative synergy. But if the managers come and harvest this, then this relationship will be more strong. Otherwise, it will be a very small relationship. Right? So therefore, to this same conceptual framework, you can bring that managerial expertise as a moderating variable. To where? කොතෙන්ටද මේක ගේන්න ඕනේ? මම මේක AB කියලා නම් කරන්නම් තැන් දෙකක් මට කියන්න බලන්න මේකෙන් කොතෙන්ටද ගේන්න ඕනේ කියලා. මේක මම A කියලා නම් කරනවා මේක මම B කියලා නම් කරනවා. කොතැනටද ගේන්න ඕනේ managerial expertise කියන්නේ? managers ලා ඇවිල්ලා මොන relationship එකකටද බලපෑම් කරන්නේ? මේ දෙන්න අතර තියෙන එකටද මේ දෙන්න අතර තියෙන එකටද? Aද Bද? Is it A or B? Most identified that as B. However, you have to, according to theory, we have to bring that with the relationship A. The reason is that workforce diversity and creative synergy is there, right? Yes, it is there. Then if you harvest this relationship only, then we'll go to the example again, then you will understand it. And so this says, because each group brings its own special expertise and skills to the workplace, this synergy can be exploited. However, only if managers know how to harness the special talents of the diverse work group. Otherwise, they will remain untapped. Right? So therefore, if you want to exploit this relationship, managers know how to harness the special talents of the diverse work group. Right? So managers want to know how to harvest the diverse workforce special talents. Right? That means to take this as a synergy, that synergy will be there. However, if you want to build this as a strong relationship, then managers should come and identify, right? They should come and identify these skills, right? Then only this synergy will be work, right? So that is, it says, right? So therefore, what we can do, we can identify this managerial expertise as a moderate variable in between workforce diversity and creative synergy, right? Because the reason is workforce diversity and creative synergy, is this relationship is there. However, to harness this workforce diversity correctly, the managerial expertise should be intervene this relationship, influence this relationship, right? Then only a strong creative synergy will created, and that will affect organizational effectiveness. If the creative synergy is there, then managers should not come and harness it, right? So that's what you have to understand. Creative synergy එක ඇති වෙලා නම් තියෙන්නේ හරියටම ආයි managers ලා මෙතෙන්ට ඇවිල්ලා intervene කරන්න ඕනේ. And the workforce diversity එකෙන් creative synergy එක ඇති කරගන්න තැනට තමයි managers level influence කරන්නේ. ඒක නිසා තමයි managerial expertise කියන එක මේ relationships දෙක moderate කරන variable එකක් විදිහට identify කරන්න. Right? So this is how we can identify the full conceptual framework. Right? Okay. Now, before moving further, have you seen in my previous very first slides, there was another variable called confounding variables. Confounding variables. That idea about confounding variables is also important when you develop your conceptual frameworks. Anyone with the idea of what is this confounding variable? Because it is also important in developing a correct conceptual framework. Right, I will explain it. Now, when we take some relationships, remember there are some relationships and there are some variables which affects both IV and DV. Right, so therefore that relationship actually occurred due to the confounding variable. Otherwise, there's no relationship. Right, otherwise there will no any relationship. Okay. It is not mediating, right? ඒක mediating නෙමෙයි. දැන් ඉස්සෙල්ලා mediating එකේදී මම මොකක්ද කිව්වේ? ඒ දෙන්න අතර relationship එකක් හැදිලා තියෙනවා. ඒත් ඒක හැදුනේ කොහොමද කියන එක explain කරේ. ඒ දෙන්න අතර relationship එකක් හැදෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ relationship එක හැදුනේ කොහොමද කියන එක explain කරන්න තමයි mediator මැදට ආවේ. දැන් mediator ආපු ගමන් හරියම ලේසියෙන් තේරෙනවා මේ relationship එක කොහොමද හැදුනේ කියලා. හරිද? හැබැයි සමහර ඒවා තියෙනවා, there are relationships, right? Actually, those are wrong relationships, right? Those are not correct relationships. Then why we see them as relationships? Only because of this confounding variables. It is something like that. I have seen a very good example in the internet. I will take the same example. If you search about confounding variables, you will also get that same example sometimes. Right? So, in this example, it says one person collected information that one person has seen that sunburn increases among people during some time. Sunburn increases among people during some time. And at the same time, he has seen, right? Ice cream consumption also increases. Ice cream consumption. Now this person identified the relationship between ice cream consumption and sunburn and conclude that when ice cream consumption increase, sunburn will increase. This is his conclusion. What you can say? මොකද වාට හිතෙන්නේ? අයිස්ක්‍රීම් කනවා වැඩි වෙනකොට sunburn වැඩි වෙන්න පුළුවන්ද?
It's because of summer.
Yes, maybe, right? So then that means, right? So when you see this type of a relationship and statistically proved, what we can do, right? When ice cream consumption increases, sunburn will increases, right? Actually, there's no any theoretical back in between these two, because just two variables and you show some relationship. But when you see further, then you can see that people eat ice cream because of summer, right? Or maybe due to temperature. Say that it is due to temperature, right? Due to temperature, they eat ice cream. At the same time, people do this sunburn again due to temperature, right? Then what is the actual reason? It is temperature, right? Reason for the sunburn is temperature, and reason for the ice cream consumption is also temperature, right? But we forget about this temperature and build up a relationship between ice cream consumption and sunburn. Sometimes in our, and especially in our undergraduate research also, this type of relationships we see, right? But false relationships, right? So in that case, if you can see this type of a relationship, then we can identify them as, say, this is temperature. Then remember, this is not a mediator. මේ mediator එකක් නෙමෙයි. හරිද? ඒ කියන්නේ අපිට කියන්න බෑ ice cream කන හින්දා temperature එක වැඩි වෙනවා, temperature එක වැඩි හින්දා sunburn වැඩි වෙනවා කියලා. එහෙම නැත්නම් අපිට කියන්න බෑ temperature එක හින්දා ice cream කනවා ඒක හරි. හැබැයි ice cream කන හින්දා sunburn වැඩි වෙනවා කියලා කොහොමද කියන්න බෑ. නේද? ඒ කියන්නේ මේක mediator එකක් නෙමෙයි. Right? So this will not explain, temperature will not explain the relationship between this IV and DV. Therefore, if there is some variable which affects the identified IV and DV bond at the same time, then we identify this type of variables as confounding variable and try to avoid this type of variables from your conceptual frame. Right? Try to avoid them. And when you do your research, especially, you will see this type of relationship sometimes when it's come to your higher studies, right? Then there are methods, right? That it doesn't mean that you cannot do the research and you have to totally forget about this. You have some methods to avoid this confounding method in your confounding variables in your research. Sometimes it is based on the sample selection. Right? That there are so many methods to avoid this type of variables from your research, and sometimes this may totally due to misinterpretations of theories. Right? Sometimes due to misinterpretation of theories, sometimes due to not reading the literature well. Right? So therefore, remember this confounding variables effect sometimes can be happen due to misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and wrong identifications of IVs and DVs, right? So therefore, you have to be very careful when you see this type of statistical relationships, right? I just wanted to give you some idea about this, because sometimes statistically you will see relationships, but remember, these are not theoretically validated. If you cannot finally give why answer to why, then you are failed, right? And as I told you earlier, sometimes you will see your same variable act as mediating and moderating, right? That means it mediates the relationship, at the same time moderate the relationship. That means first it builds the relationship between you two, right? First, it helps you to build your relationship, and thereafter, it will influence your relationship. first it helps you to build your relationship. Then it start to influence your relationship as well. Then you have to identify this variable as a moderator, at the same time mediator. Right? So therefore, remember, sometimes in some occasions, you will identify the same variable as a mediator and a moderator. In that case, this is how you have to draw. You have to show your independent variable. Right? So this is your independent, sorry, that you can show your independent variable, this one, and you have your dependent variable. And when you take these two arrows, what is this motivation? When you see this relationship, what is this motivation? Mediator or moderator? This relationship? It is? Yes, it is mediator. Right? So this is mediator. And if you see this relationship, sorry, if you take this relationship, this is moderator. Right? So therefore, remember, when you develop your conceptual framework, that's why at the very beginning also I told you, theory plays a very big role in your research, and not only the theory, sometimes the identifications through empirical research, right? So it will sometimes explain you that some variables act as mediators and moderators in between IVs and DVs. Then you have to identify them properly, and you have to show them in your conceptual framework very correctly. And remember, always, if you show something in your mediator or moderator in your model, right, it should be reflected through your research questions and also in your hypothesis and in your model, right? So all the things should be interconnected properly. And control variables, I have already explained you what is the meaning. So here you have a very simple explanation, right? Even without having these arrows from control to DV, you can draw this conceptual framework, no problem, right? So here what it explains, now this Tobin-Given ROE, that actually this is, I have taken this from one of my lectures. So this is related to financial performance of a company. Right? And financial performance, it says that it depends on the corporate governance of the company. Right? Then we identified them as independent variables. However, at the same time, we know that, so these are the major concerns of my research. I wanted to see whether company's performance, this is the performance, whether the company's performance depend on corporate governance. Corporate governance I have identified through non-executive directors, board size, CEO duality, right? So don't worry about these terms. So these are just variables to measure the corporate governance, right? Then at the same time, research studies shows that not only corporate governance, there are so many other variables which affect the performance. Then what I have to do, I will consider only these three variables in my research as my main concerns, but at the same time, I will show these other variables as control variables in my research. So remember, without having these arrows also, you can just show them as control variables under DV or IV, right? But here you can see, we have taken this H1, H2, H3. So this is to denote our hypothesis. And with these control variables, no H, no H, right? That means what? We are going to check the relationship between only these three, right? We included leverage, firm age, and firm size just to control them in the model, because otherwise I will not get the correct result. Right? So that is the reason. හැම වෙලෙම මතක තියාගන්න අපේ ප්‍රොබ්ලම් එකට බලපානවා කියලා අපි හිතන සාධක වලට අමතරව තව ඕන තරම් සාධක තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. හරිද? එතකොට අන්නේ තියෙන්න පුළුවන් ඕන තරම් සාධක ටික තමයි මේ control variables කියලා අරන් තියෙන්නේ. Right? Right. So there is a question from Dr. Sivadaran. What will happen? Control variable affect more than independent variable on dependent variable? A good question, actually. So when you take control variables, we usually not much worry about how it affects, right? Because from our theoretical explanation, our problem statement and all, we identified our scope of the study, right? Then we can say, what is our concern? We want to see, if I take this example, I just want to see in my scope whether these three variables have some effect on the performance, right? Then there can be some other factors which have more effect, right? Then it's not a problem until my selected variables also become significant variables, because I just want to show these variables are significant and affect to my research problem. Maybe reason may be people always checked the impact of these other variables, but not much concerned about the variables in my study. Right? I may see that these corporate governance variables are very little studied in the research, right? Then that's why I have taken them and hypothesize the relationships with my selected independent variables with the theoretical explanation and empirical evidences. And in that case, even I got some less impact from my independent variable on the dependent variable, sometimes less than my control variables. Don't worry if it is significant, right? Because if the relationship is statistically significant, then we can show that this has some significant influence on our research problem, right? So that's how we have to show that. Okay, but if all these independent variables are insignificant, then there is a problem. Then there is a problem, right? That there is a problem means sometimes the problem may be with your conceptualization. And the sum, it's a prashne insignificant unata kamak nahe. Habbai insignificant une conceptualization issue ekak hindana, because in this question you explained that the control variables have more impact. That means sometimes that even that with that, if our variables also become insignificant, then there is a problem. Why? That means we haven't correctly identified the correct cause related to our issue. That is the implication. And අපිට පේනවා නම් අපි research check කරාට පස්සේ control variables significant and highly influenced by, but the independent variables that I have selected for my study are insignificant and not influenced much to the dependent variable. Then there is something to worry, right? Why? Because that means you haven't correctly identified your conceptual framework. Right? You haven't correctly identified real causes for the effect. Right? So that is the reason. Right? You haven't correctly identified. So these are the causes. This is the effect. If you correctly identified the real causes to your effect, then definitely this should be significant. Right? Coefficient value is okay. Coefficient එකක් ගැන එච්චර හිතන්න එපා. right? Because we are just going to show some hypothetical testing. We are not going to predict anything, right? We are not going to predict anything. If you are going to build up a prediction model, then yes, you have to worry about this, which one provides higher result, right? But if it is not for a prediction, if you just want to do a hypothesis testing, if you just want to whether this affect our dependent variable, or in other words, whether this affect our problem, then if it is significant, then that's it, right? Don't worry about the coefficient values. But if it is not significant, at the same time, if the control variables are significant, then you have to think again about the selection of the variables to your study, because independent variable shows the identified causes for your problem, right? So then it will reflect that you haven't correctly identified the causes for your problem, right? Is it clear? Right. Okay, so I will just very briefly explain you with the given time about the hypothesis development, because this is also related to the conceptual development, conceptual framework development. When you take hypothesis, remember, now when you take the conceptual framework, this is just a graphical illustration about what you have hypothesized, right? This is the concept in your mind to sort out your research problem, right? So therefore, remember, when you identify this hypothesis, the hypothesis means in very simple term what the researcher want to claim, right? Now suppose that people says, now normally we know that people says, when we take a loaf of bread, right, the weight is 450 grams. සාමාන්‍ය මිනිස්සු කියනවා කාංගෙඩියක් ගත්තහම බර ග්‍රෑම් 450යි කියලා. Right? Now, as a researcher, say that you want to claim that it is not. You want to say that it is not 450 grams. Right? People says that in average, always this bread is weight 450 grams. But you want to prove that, you want to statistically prove that it is not. Right? Then we identify your claim as your hypothesis. We identify that as your alternative hypothesis. Right? Then when we identify the alternative hypothesis, remember alternative hypothesis means what you want to claim in your research, what you want to prove, or in other terms, what is your perception, right, as the researcher based on theories. Then the other thing, that the general belief which is not yet tested and proved, we identify as the null hypothesis. ඔයා මේක ඔප්පු කරනකම් මිනිස්සු කියනවා පාංගෙඩියක බර ග්‍රෑම් 450යි කියලා. Then it is null. We identified that as null. Why? Because it is not yet tested. Right? Then you want to test it and you want to bring some new claim. Right? Then we identify that as alternative hypothesis. Right? So therefore, remember, in your research, you have to show alternative hypothesis and you have to prove that in your research study through your collected data. Right? So if we take this example related to workforce diversity and organizational effectiveness, now suppose that workforce diversity, right? So this influence the organizational effectiveness, then I can say, this is what I want to show first. Then I can say as my hypothesis, workforce diversity affect the organizational effectiveness. And through empirical research, if I can see what is the relationship, if I can see that it is positively affect, that also you can include. Hypothesis එක ලියනකොට ඔයාට කියන්න පුළුවන් නම් මේ දෙන්න අතර තියෙන ධන සම්බන්ධයක්ද ඍණ සම්බන්ධයක්ද කියලා ඔයාට ඒකත් මෙතනට එකතු කරන්න පුළුවන්. Then you can say workforce diversity has a positive effect on organizational effectiveness. Positive impact on organizational effectiveness. Then I can name this as my H1. And since there is a direction, I can show that direction also in this arrow. මේ direction එක මේකේ දානවද නැද්ද කියන එක ඔයා තීරණය කරන්න. If you can correctly identify the direction, then only you can bring this. If you cannot still confirm about the direction through literature, then don't include this direction. But if you can, then you have to include it. Right? So then this will be your H1. Then I have another claim. What is my next claim? I want to say that managerial expertise will positively influence the relationship between workforce diversity and organizational effectiveness. Right? So that also I want to prove through my research. I want to prove this because theory says that, but I want to empirically test this and prove it. Therefore, I can take my second hypothesis as I take this as H2. Managerial expertise will positively influence the relationship between workforce diversity and organizational effectiveness. Right, so that is my H2, second hypothesis. Right, then null hypothesis, you don't want to worry and you don't want to write that in your study. Right, if I say the null hypothesis for this H1 and H2, for H1, my null hypothesis will be workforce diversity will not affect organizational effectiveness. And for this H2, my null hypothesis will be managerial expertise will not influence the relationship between workforce diversity and organizational effectiveness. Right? However, remember, null hypothesis, you don't need to write specially, right? Because it is implied, but your alternative hypothesis always you have to write. Right? When you write your alternative hypothesis, remember, there should be a very strong literature support. Without literature support, you cannot just say that there are relationships and this moderate, this mediate. No. To say that, definitely there should be theories or empirical evidences. Only then you can bring your conceptual frameworks with hypothesis of this study. Right? So I'm not going to explain this because I have already explained the hypothesis. So this is just a testable statement which explains the relationship between two variables or two or more variables. Right? Testable, because when you take this graph, this is just a graph, you cannot see anything, but once you convert that into this hypothesis term, then we can test it. Right? Then, as I told you, when you write your hypothesis, you can write them with the direction or without the direction. Right? So if you write this with the direction, then we term this as directional hypothesis, otherwise non-directional hypothesis. Usually for undergraduate level, it is enough to write at least the non-directional hypothesis. But when it's come to your PhD level, definitely you have to identify the relationship with the directions. Right? Then you have to write down the directional hypothesis. Okay? And to identify this, you need to have a proper literature review. The direction can be positive, negative, less than, more than, right? Everything shows the direction. Example, female students are more motivated than male students in their studies. Right? Female students are more motivated. So direction shows. Right? Then who are the highly motivated gang? It is female. Right? Then work environment positively influences employee performance, positively influences direction. The greater the stress experienced in the job, the lower the job satisfaction of employees. Stress influences the job satisfaction negatively. Greater the stress, lower the job satisfaction, direction. Right? Can you see? So when you write down your hypothesis, therefore remember, you can write that with your direction. Positive, negative, less than, more than, greater than, lower than, right? So anyhow, you can show your hypothesis. Mr. Manoj, do you have a question? Yeah, that it asks that can we have this presentation? Yes, definitely I can send this presentation to the organizers, right? Right. So then when you take the non-directional hypothesis, that means no indication of the direction. For an example, you just say that there is a relationship between these two variables. Right? There is a relationship between work environment and employee performance. There is a relationship between gender and motivation for studies. There is a difference between the work ethic values of American and Asian employees. Right? We don't say the direction. Right? Direction is silent. So we identified them as non-directional hypotheses. So remember, if we relate this with our conceptual framework, our main discussion, if you have identified a directional hypothesis, then please show that direction with that arrow, right? If it is, for an example, if you want to explain about a positive relationship, right, between X and Y, X is the independent variable and Y is the dependent variable, then you can show positive sign. Then we know that there is a positive direction between these two. If you have written non-directional hypothesis, then don't write this. Right? Then don't write this. Right? But as I told you, if you are doing your higher studies, then always try to identify the direction with the relationship. Right? And right, I will skip this part because it is not much important for this particular discussion. I have already explained the null hypothesis. Since you are going to prove your hypothesis, that means you are going to prove your alternative hypothesis, always we have to reject the null hypothesis, right? Only if you can reject your null hypothesis, you can accept your alternative hypothesis. If the null hypothesis is accepted, that means your claim is not valid, right? The claim in your research will not valid if the null hypothesis will accepted, right? So alternative hypothesis I have already explained. This is just an example to identify what is this null and alternative. Now, if you take female students are more motivated than male students in their studies, right? Female students are more motivated than male students in their studies. So this is my alternative hypothesis. This is my H1. Then my H0 should be, there is no difference between female students and male students. No difference between the motivational level of female students and male students in their studies. That is the null hypothesis. If there is no any difference, that means mean value should be equal, right? Or if in other terms, if you deduct one mean value from the other mean value, the answer will be 0. So this is null, H0. But if you want to write this as H1, right? So you have to show female students, right? Mean motivational level of female students is higher than the male students. So I think there is one mistake in this slide, right? So this one should be written like this and like this, right? Female students are making female can. Female students motivational level is higher than the male, right? Or male students are lower than the female students. So they right? So this is how the hypothesis is presented in statistical way. Or otherwise, you can show that in a statement. ඒකෙන් මතක තියාගන්න hypothesis එකක් ලියනකොට ඒක මේ විදිහට statistically present කරන්නත් පුළුවන්. එහෙම නැත්නම් ඔයාට statement එකක් විදිහට present කරන්නත් පුළුවන්. Usually what happens, your main hypothesis in your studies, that means what you are going to prove in your study related to your research problem, we will write them as statements. But the hypothesis related to our statistical test, maybe for regression analysis, may be related to your normality, linearity assumptions, right? Hypothesis related to your statistical test, usually we write in statistical method. But if that hypothesis is related to your conceptual framework, then try to write that in sentence mode, right? Okay. Right, so this is also another example. You can just see this, right? This is how you have to show this is how you can show your hypothesis as a statement or as statistical methods, right? Okay, now here we have this example, right? Workforce diversity, creative synergy, organizational effectiveness, managerial expertise, right? If you want to build hypothesis for this, remember, first you have to build your hypothesis in between the original IV and DV. H1, you have to say that workforce diversity influence the organizational effectiveness, right? Then you can say, right? Then you can say workforce diversity creates creative energy. Workforce diversity creates creative energy and creative synergy. And then you can say creative synergy affects organizational effectiveness, right? First we explained that workforce diversity affects organizational effectiveness. Workforce diversity creates creative synergy. Then creative synergy affects organizational effectiveness. Then you can say as your H4, right? You can say creative synergy mediate the relationship between workforce diversity and organizational effectiveness, right? And you can say managerial expertise moderate the relationship between workforce diversity and creative synergy, right? So first you have to identify your conceptual framework and you have to connect that with your hypothesis. Okay, right? So this is just an example, right? I will share this presentation, then you can just read this and you can draw the conceptual framework and you can formulate your hypothesis, right? So if I summarized everything that what we explained so far, remember, conceptual framework is the foundation on which the entire research project is based. So if you have done a mistake in the conceptual framework, then the total study will go wrong. Right? Why? Because it shows in diagram form or in equation form or as a statement. Finally, it will show what is you are going to check. What is your research problem? You will show that as dependent variable. And what are the causes for your research problem? Your independent variable. And why this causes, how and why these causes affects, that is your theories. And if there are any other variables who influence or mediate these relationships, the moderators and mediators. So everything you can show through your conceptual framework. Right? So therefore, if you make some mistake in drawing this conceptual framework, then it will totally destroy your study. Right? Then also, when you identify the variables in your conceptual framework, remember to label them and define them correctly. Right? So remember, every time, once you develop your conceptual framework, after that in your thesis, you have to explain your variables one by one. Right? You have to show how you are going to measure them in your study. Right? So you have to very clearly show them, and you have to connect your conceptual framework with your hypothesis. Right? And also remember, very important point, you have to show very clearly the relationship among the variables of the model and why there is such a relationship exists. Right? So that's why you need to bring theories and empirical evidences to your conceptual framework. So therefore, remember, when you before develop the conceptual framework, there should be a very thorough literature review, which consists proper theoretical identification and empirical identification related to your conceptual framework. Only then you can strongly prove that your conceptual framework is strong. Right? It is correct. Otherwise, people will not believe your conceptualization. Even you bring some data and statistically prove it, if there's no proper theoretical backing or empirical justification, and if you not provide a clear answer to why this type of relationships are existed, then people will not accept your study as a good study. Right? Even you got significant results. Right? So therefore, remember, conceptual framework elaborates the relationships among the variables. It explains the theory underlying these relations and describes the nature and direction of the relationships. And it provides the logical base for developing testable hypotheses. Right? So this is what I explained, the literature review. Right. Now we have come to the end of our workshop. Any questions? If you have any questions, then you can ask now. Any questions or any comments or any misagreements, that disagreements, anything? Okay, if there's no question, at least can I know that whether you got any new idea? Have you learned anything new? Hmm?
Ma'am, there are
Yes.
messages in the chat, I think.
Yeah, yes, I can see them. Yes, okay, no, any questions, that I cannot see any questions. Okay, then, so if you don't have any questions and if it is clear, then I think we can wind up the workshop now. And so thank you for joining and asking questions. And if you have more questions on this, especially related to conceptual framework or developing this hypothesis or anything, then you can contact me, and I'm always happy to help anyone, the undergraduates or postgraduates who join this presentation. Right. Okay. Thank you.
So thank you very much, ma'am. With that, we come to the end of the two-day workshop organized in conjunction with ICSSL 2023. And let me now invite our conference co-chairperson, Ms. Akshila Seneviratna, to deliver the thanking note. Ms. Akshila, we can't hear you.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am assured that you have got a lot of things from the workshop, and I take this opportunity to thank everyone for this workshop success. First of all, on behalf of the organizing committee of First International Conference of Social Sciences and Languages, Sabaragamu University of Sri Lanka, I am thankful to our resource person, Dr. Madurika Nanayakkara, for your insightful presentation today. I'm grateful for the time you spend in preparation to present us with a meaningful workshop on the developing conceptual framework of research. Thank you very much, madam. You really motivated us to gain more knowledge and work hard in this field. Then I would like to thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor Uday Ratnayaka, and the Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences and Languages, Dr. Sampath Fernando, giving us the courage and motivation always to arrange this type of event under ICSSL. Actually, this is our second pre-conference workshop. So my special thanks go to Professor Manohari Uduporu and Dr. Pulle Kamge, because they are the chairpersons of workshop organizing committee. So thank you, Professor, and thank you, Doctor, because you are organizing wonderful workshop series under ICSSL. So I'm very grateful for the time you spend in organizations to these workshops to enhance the research capacity of the research in line with ICSSL 2023. Then I would like to thank our conference chair, Dr. Sumadhi Samaravira, conference co-chairs, conference secretaries, and all other organizing committee members for your dedications to success this workshop and success all the activities in this first ICSSL 2023. Finally, I thank you all the participants for showing your interest in this workshop. Hope this workshop was truly worthy for you. Finally, on behalf of the organizing committee, I must thank you again, everyone, for making this workshop success. So have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.